Joining us now is Jim Walden, a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of New York, who I should note has argued several times in front of Special Master Judge Raymond Dearie in that role. Jim, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So, as you look at these two cases, I'll set aside Letitia James's lawsuit for the moment. When you look at Mar-a-Lago and you look at what happened on January 6th, do you think one of these investigations is potentially stronger and can support a criminal indictment against former president rather than the other?
I think the January 6th investigation, both before, during, and after the insurrection, is definitely more red meat. There is going to be more witnesses. There are more aspects of criminality. They cover the country, if you think about it, from Washington, D.C. To Georgia and Colorado. So I think that that's going to take the most time. And Merrick Garland's going to have one shot at this.
Yeah.
They cannot bring successive cases against Donald Trump. That's never going to fly. So I think that they are working hard on everything, but they are going to put together a massive case that puts the former president with a lot of other very unseemly people in a range of crimes.
You have put together what is a very instructive graphic that I will pull up. I will ask our beautiful production team to pull up right now. This is what you see as the sort of the wheel and spokes of a criminal charge, effectively. There are a number of charges that you outline here. Among them, I think two of the most kind of explosive and under-discussed: murder conspiracy, and there you specify Mike Pence. Can you talk a little bit about how you see Trump potentially being involved in murder conspiracy?
So the way you would describe this kind of an investigation is right on point. Prosecutors refer to it as a hub-and-spoke RICO conspiracy. And at the center of the hub, the round wheel, is all of the primary people. And in the graphic, there are some people named, but literally the people at the center of this were too big to fit on the graphic. So that's really the nerve center of the conspiracy. But as in an organized crime case, which the racketeering law was designed to address, there are all kinds of crimes. Yeah. There's murder, there's extortion, there's gambling, there's prostitution. And the reason that RICO is so powerful is because you can bring all of those crimes together under. And the Pence murder conspiracy, I think, is really fascinating because obviously we don't know all the evidence yet. But what we do know is that at the ellipse, the president was disparaging Pence. Pence had already communicated that he was not going to stop the election from going forward. Trump tweets, you can see in the videos, the crowd surging forward. Mm-hmm. His staff tells him that there are people there saying, hang Mike Pence. The president is reported to say essentially he deserves it. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that we don't know.
He knows they're armed. He doesn't want the security systems to be put in place. He wants them to take him down.
Exactly.
And then we don't know what actually happens in the 187 minutes while he's in the White House. But it doesn't sound like he was doing anything to ensure Mike Pence's safety. There is a lot of talk about the pressure campaign on Pence being a topic of future January 6th committee hearings. There is also pressure for Vice President Pence to testify. Do you think there's any world in which Mike Pence testifies?
I believe that Mike Pence is different than Donald Trump in many ways, and I think that while he had to toe the party line during the course of that administration, that he's more like traditional Republicans than President Trump. So whether they will force him to, I hope that he does. I think Jacobs's testimony was incredibly powerful. Seeing the footage of what he and his family went through on that day was horrific.
What about money laundering? I know you have fraud on there as well. There's been some talk of the investigation into the Save America PAC. But what specifically, where do you see the money laundering factoring into all this?
So this is really interesting. But if you think about it, this is exactly what happened to Steve Bannon with the Build the Wall. They brought charges for fraud and money laundering, because when you raise money through fraud, that's illegal proceeds. And when you then use those proceeds for purportedly legitimate, that's a form of money laundering. It's not all just like the cartels, right? When you have illegal money and then you use it, that's a subject of the money laundering statute. So that's another possible thread for them. And based on the subpoenas that I've been seeing, it really seems like that's one of the themes of the requests.
I say this, we're talking about these charges, and as much as we have covered this topic, as much as we have exhaustively chronicled the misdeeds of Donald Trump, to be talking about a former president and saying the words murder conspiracy and money laundering along. If we could pull that graphic up again and look at what you think is a former assistant U.S. attorney the president could be charged with is staggering. And I don't think we should lose sight of the gravity of all this and the people named in the center of this. One of the things that seemed to be happening at the outset of the DOJ's investigation is it seemed to be a ground-up investigation, right? There seemed to be a lot of focus on the unnamed January 6 rioters. And I know at least some legal minds, including Andrew Weissman, said that's the wrong way of going about this. We should be looking at this as a top-down conspiracy. You certainly have a top-down pyramid right there. Not quite a pyramid, but you know what I'm saying. You're looking at key players in the Trump administration, in the Trump circle. Do you think that is what the DOJ is now doing as well? I
actually think that's what DOJ has been doing all along. I mean, Merrick Garland was under a lot of pressure right from the beginning. The insurrection was horrific. It was anti-democratic. It was one of the worst things that ever happened in our history. He needed to bring action, and they were the low-hanging fruit. So I believe that we're seeing now the results of months and months, maybe a year of planning to get to this stage where, just remember, 5 former folks in the White House circle went into the grand jury. Within a couple days, 40 subpoenas go out, search warrants are served, phones are seized. This is not something that was planned overnight.
Yeah. I got to ask you about Mar-a-Lago because there's been, you get conflicting opinions on this. It is a tighter case. It is more seemingly easily provable. But you don't think that the gravity of that kind of obstruction will support effectively a historic indictment of a sitting former president. Is that fair to say?
I think that's completely fair to say. I mean, a documents case where you have someone that has been known to be sloppy, was probably getting counsel from lawyers, even though some of that information had no business anywhere near where the president was keeping it. That is a case that if you indict the president, the former president, on that charge, it is going to be much more difficult to defend. It will be seen as political, as opposed to this kind of multi-pronged RICO conspiracy where there could be even street-level crimes. Even if the president himself is not named in it, there are certainly people that were guilty of sedition, as I think many people believe the president was. And when you commit, when there is a murder or a death in the context of a felony, that's felony murder. So putting Pence aside, there's a valid case for them to put together this massive conspiracy with all of these prongs.
Yeah, and that is something Joyce Vance, one of our MSNBC legal analysts, has also echoed. I just want to say, as far as lives lost, the ODNI assessment is not yet complete.
No.
And if human intelligence sources have been compromised or even extinguished, that will probably ratchet Mar-a-Lago up to another level. Both of them. We're talking about a former president.
I know.
I think everybody needs to remind themselves we are not talking about just anyone. This is someone who is running the country, and look at the bevy of charges that are on the table. Staggering. Jim Walden is a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of New York. Jim, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us about some very compelling things.
Thank you.